Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we step into the shifting sands of ancient Judea, where kings were crowned by Rome but judged by heaven, where marble palaces rose from desert rock, and where the house of Herod built temples, fortresses, and entire cities, yet never truly secured a throne that was their own. This is the entire history of the house of Herod explained, from Herod the Great and the splendor of the Second Temple, to Masada standing against the sky, to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD during the Jewish-Roman War. In this deep journey through ancient Judea history and Bible history for sleep, we'll trace ambition and fear, power and prophecy, architecture and ashes, and the quiet end of a dynasty remembered as kings without a throne. You will hear how Roman politics shaped their crowns, how faith questioned their legitimacy, and how the Herodian dynasty end came not with one final battle, but with silence settling over broken stone. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories, these slow explorations of Bible history for sleep and ancient empires help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let the noise of the present fade, and allow the desert wind to carry you back to a land suspended between Caesar and covenant, between temple light and imperial shadow. Tonight, we begin where crowns glittered under Roman approval, and where every stone whispered that power, no matter how grand, is never fully at rest. Before there were kings who carried the name Herod, before the marble palaces rose above Jerusalem, and before Rome stamped its eagles into the dust of the east, Judea was already a land that never truly slept. It was a narrow corridor of stone and sand, a restless frontier between empire and eternity, a place where the ambitions of Caesar pressed against the promises of God. In the stillness of the desert night, when the wind moved softly across the hills, one could almost hear the quiet tension beneath the stars. Every caravan that crossed the region knew it. Every legionary who tightened his grip on a spear understood it. Judea was not merely another province in Roman Judea. It was the most dangerous crossroads in Judean history, a sacred geography wrapped in fragile politics. The Mediterranean shimmered to the west, the deserts opened to Arabia in the east, and trade routes stitched together Africa, Asia, and Europe through this slender land. Whoever controlled Judea controlled more than territory. They controlled the gateway between continents, between belief systems, between the mortal authority of emperors and the invisible sovereignty of heaven. And long before the house of Herod emerged from the margins of power, this land had already witnessed the rise and fall of conquerors who believed themselves eternal. Assyrians had marched through its valleys, Babylonians had carried its people into exile, Persians had rebuilt what others destroyed, Greeks had layered philosophy over prophecy, and now Rome, patient and relentless, extended its administrative hand across the region, transforming independent kingdoms into carefully supervised client states. The rhythm of history for sleep is gentle here, but beneath that softness is iron. Rome did not simply conquer lands, it reorganized them, taxed them, and bound them into a vast imperial machine. Yet Judea refused to become ordinary. Its people did not measure identity merely through loyalty to an emperor. They measured it through covenant, through scripture, through a living memory that stretched back to Abraham and David. This is why biblical history for sleep cannot be separated from political reality. In Judea, faith was not a private comfort, it was the backbone of national identity. The temple in Jerusalem rose above the city like a white crown, its stones glowing in the sun, its courts echoing with prayer and sacrifice. Pilgrims traveled for days to stand within its shadow. Priests tended rituals that were believed to bind heaven and earth. And just beyond those sacred steps, Roman standards fluttered in the wind, their golden eagles a silent reminder that another authority claimed dominion. This was the paradox that made Judea so volatile. It was a buffer zone between the power of Caesar and the sovereignty of God, a place where every governor had to balance taxation with theology, order with outrage. Even the mightiest generals understood that a single miscalculation here could ignite rebellion. The land did not sleep because the tension did not sleep. In taverns and marketplaces, whispers traveled faster than caravans. In courtyards, elders debated scripture while soldiers watched from a distance. A land so small carried expectations so vast, and somewhere in that fragile equilibrium, destiny was already preparing the stage for Herod the Great, though his name had not yet echoed through marble halls. For now, Judea remained what it had always been, a land desired by empires, feared by rulers, and held together by a promise that no sword could fully sever. Judea was a land that never slept. It was because its heart beat inside stone walls that rose above Jerusalem like a silent vow. The temple was not merely architecture, it was memory carved into limestone, covenant shaped into courtyards, prophecy resting upon pillars. As dawn light spilled across its terraces, priests moved through incense smoke with deliberate calm, their garments whispering against polished floors. Pilgrims pressed forward with offerings, carrying lambs, coins, and private burdens. In these moments, Judean history felt suspended between heaven and earth. Yet even within this sacred rhythm, another question lingered beneath the prayers. Who was the true king of this people? Rome could appoint rulers, Rome could mint coins and command legions, but in the imagination of the faithful, kingship was never meant to be granted by imperial decree. It was meant to be anointed. The phrase "King of the Jews" carried more than political weight. It carried theological gravity. It echoed the memory of David, the shepherd who became sovereign under divine promise. It whispered of a future ruler who would not simply collect taxes, but restore justice. And so a tension lived quietly in every marketplace conversation and every festival gathering. A ruler confirmed by Rome might sit on a throne, but if he was not believed to be chosen by God, his crown felt fragile. In Roman Judea, legitimacy was a delicate balance between sword and scripture. This is why biblical history for sleep must move gently through this era. The conflict was not always loud. Often it was internal, almost meditative, yet deeply volitive. A people bound by covenant could tolerate foreign oversight for a time, but they could not surrender the idea that their destiny belonged to something greater than Caesar. One nation, one temple, one promise not yet fulfilled. The repetition became almost liturgical. One nation, one temple, one promise not yet fulfilled. In the shaded porticos in Jerusalem, elders debated interpretations of law, while young men listened with restless eyes. Some dreamed of revolt, others hoped for reform, most simply prayed for stability. But stability in Judea was never simple. Taxes flowed to Rome, troops enforced order, governors rotated through office with careful diplomacy, and always there was the unspoken fear that a single spark could ignite revolt. The temple itself, radiant and revered, was also a reminder of vulnerability. Its grandeur proclaimed devotion, yet it stood beneath the watchful gaze of empire. Roman standards were never far away. This was the paradox that shaped the future of the House of Herod. Any ruler who wished to govern here had to master not only military strategy, but also symbolism. He had to appear strong enough to satisfy Rome and faithful enough to soothe the people. Few men could accomplish both, fewer still could survive the strain. The longing for a divinely appointed king did not fade with time. If anything, it deepened. Stories of deliverance circulated quietly, woven into psalms and whispered in homes after sunset. Herod the Great had not yet taken center stage, but the expectations that would define his reign were already forming in the collective heart of the nation. To rule Judea was not simply to hold power, it was to navigate a sacred narrative that predated Rome itself. The land did not sleep because hope did not sleep, and hope, when pressed too tightly, can become fire. Beyond the incense and the arguments, beyond the shimmer of the temple stones and the metallic discipline of Roman armor, there was another layer of reality quietly taking shape. Power in Judea was never empty. If Rome did not fill it directly, it appointed someone who would. Client kings became the preferred solution, rulers who would kneel in loyalty to Caesar while standing tall before their own people. It was a delicate theater, and the audience was unforgiving. In this tense landscape of Roman Judea, where faith and force shared the same narrow streets, the stage was prepared for a family that did not quite belong, yet would come to define an era. The house of Herod did not descend from the ancient line of David. They were not priestly aristocrats of Jerusalem. Their roots traced back to Idumea, a region south of Judea, a land once subdued and absorbed into Jewish territory. Their ancestors had adopted Jewish customs, yet suspicion lingered. In matters of bloodline and covenant, memory is long. To some, they were converts, to others, opportunists. To Rome, they were useful, and usefulness in imperial politics often mattered more than heritage. As history for sleep unfolds in this quiet cadence, we begin to sense how such a family could rise. Rome did not require love from its appointees. It required reliability. It required taxes delivered on time, rebellions suppressed quickly, trade routes secured firmly. A ruler who could accomplish these tasks would be rewarded with authority, even if his legitimacy was debated in whispers. And so, in the subtle calculations of empire, an opening appeared. Before Herod the Great became the towering figure later remembered in both admiration and fear, he was part of a lineage learning how to survive at the edge of power. His father, Antipater, maneuvered carefully within Roman alliances, aligning with generals who would eventually reshape the republic into empire. Loyalty was currency, strategy was survival. In Judea history, this was a turning point not marked by a single battle, but by gradual positioning. The Herodian family understood something essential about this land. They understood that brute force alone would not suffice. To govern Judea, one had to perform legitimacy. One had to build, to sponsor, to appear generous. Architecture could become argument. Stone could become persuasion. The temple, revered as it was, would one day be expanded under Herodian ambition, its magnificence amplified to silence critics and impress pilgrims. But that chapter has not yet begun. For now, we remain in the moment when the idea of such a ruler first became imaginable. A foreign-born king in a sacred land, a crown granted by Rome, yet resting uneasily upon the head of one who sought acceptance from a covenant people. The paradox deepened. The people longed for a king anointed by God. Rome demanded a king appointed by Caesar. The Herods would attempt to stand in the narrow space between those two expectations, and in that space, tension thickened like desert heat. Biblical history for sleep often carries echoes of prophecy, and in this era, those echoes felt close. Some saw in political upheaval signs of divine timing. Others saw only danger. Markets bustled, priests prayed, soldiers drilled, and beneath it all, a new dynasty prepared itself to step forward, not as natural heirs, but as strategic survivors. To hold a crown in Judea required more than gold. It required calculation, resilience, and a willingness to navigate suspicion from every side. The land that never slept was about to receive rulers who would never fully rest. He rebuilt the temple of God, and yet he killed those whom God had entrusted to him to love. As the land that never slept adjusted to the rule of a new dynasty, one name began to rise above the dust of ancient Judea with a force that felt both brilliant and unsettling. Herod the Great did not inherit a throne wrapped in ancestral certainty. He stepped into it as a calculated choice of empire, a Roman client king elevated not because prophecy demanded him, but because Rome required him. In the soft cadence of Herod the Great history, his ascent feels almost inevitable, yet nothing about it was simple. He was born into the margins, the son of Antipater, an Idumean strategist who understood that survival in Judea depended upon proximity to Roman power. Bloodlines in Jerusalem were sacred, but influence in Rome was decisive. And so Herod's early life unfolded between two worlds, one shaped by covenant and memory, the other by ambition and imperial order. As a young governor in Galilee, he learned quickly that hesitation invited rebellion. His reputation formed not through gentleness, but through decisive action. Rome noticed. In a political climate where loyalty was measured in efficiency, Herod proved himself useful. Each title he carried, each robe he wore, each ring pressed upon his finger was exchanged for allegiance to a distant empire. The Senate in Rome would eventually declare him King of the Jews, a phrase heavy with irony. For the people of Judea, kingship was sacred. For Rome, it was administrative. And Herod stood at the intersection of those definitions, aware that his authority rested not on ancestral legitimacy, but on Roman endorsement. The path from frontier prince to crowned ruler was paved with calculated alliances. He aligned himself with Mark Antony, navigated the turbulence of Roman civil war, and later secured the favor of Octavian, who would become Augustus. In King Herod biography, these transitions often read like political skill, yet beneath them was constant anxiety. A ruler appointed by Rome could be removed by Rome. The crown he wore shimmered, but its foundation was fragile. To secure his position in ancient Judea, Herod needed more than soldiers. He needed perception. He needed to appear not merely as Rome's instrument, but as Judea's protector. And so the man who would be remembered as both visionary and tyrant began to craft an identity shaped by stone, ceremony, and spectacle. Yet in these early years, before the grand temples and fortified palaces, he was simply a man determined to hold power in a land that tested every ruler. The house of Herod had stepped fully into history, and its most formidable figure was learning that greatness in Judea required constant negotiation between empire and eternity. So if power gave Herod a crown, architecture gave him a voice. In the unfolding arc of Herod the Great's history, stone became his argument, marble his persuasion, and entire cities his attempt to quiet the fragile question of legitimacy. He understood something profound about ancient Judea. Faith was visible. It rose in walls, echoed in courtyards, shimmered in ritual. If he could not inherit sacred blood, perhaps he could construct sacred space. And so the king who had been appointed by Rome turned toward building as both strategy and confession. The Herod temple project would become the centerpiece of his ambition. The second temple, already revered, would not merely be repaired, it would be transformed into a marvel. Massive retaining walls were carved and set with astonishing precision. White stone caught the sunlight so brilliantly that travelers described it as snow upon the mountain. Pilgrims approaching Jerusalem saw not just a place of worship, but a statement. Herod was saying through architecture that he honored the God of Israel. Yet beneath that reverence lay calculation. The temple expansion was not only devotion, it was diplomacy. It was an offering to both heaven and empire, an attempt to root his reign in something larger than Roman decree. In King Herod biography, this duality defines him. He could design harbors and fortresses with equal brilliance. Caesarea Maritima rose along the coast, a city engineered with Roman sophistication, complete with amphitheater, harbor, and temples dedicated to Caesar. It was a love letter to Rome carved into Mediterranean stone. Masada, perched above the desert, stood as a fortress against both invasion and betrayal, its walls guarding not only treasure, but fear. Each project carried symbolism. Each stone laid upon the earth felt like an effort to pour concrete over the anxiety within him. A Roman client king must always prove himself, and so Herod proved himself in limestone and granite. The scale of his constructions was staggering. Aqueducts carried water across arid terrain. Palaces shimmered with mosaic floors and frescoed walls. Markets thrived beneath colonnades. To some, he was a visionary who brought prosperity and stability. To others, he was a tyrant who taxed heavily to fund grandeur. Both perceptions held truth. The land that never slept now glittered with new monuments, and yet beneath the brilliance, tension remained. For all his genius, Herod could not build away suspicion. He could not erase the whisper that he was an outsider ruling a sacred inheritance. Biblical history for sleep reminds us that sacred narratives do not yield easily to spectacle. The temple he expanded would become one of the wonders of the region, yet devotion cannot be engineered like a harbor. It must be believed. In quiet moments, perhaps even Herod sensed this. The Herod temple project might draw pilgrims, but would it draw trust? Could marble silence doubt? Could towering walls secure loyalty? In the shimmering light of Jerusalem, architecture attempted to bridge heaven and empire. But inside the king, unease still lived. Yet no wall, however thick, could fortify a heart ruled by suspicion. In the later chapters of Herod the Great history, the grandeur of stone gives way to the shadows of the palace interior, where fear moved more quietly than servants and struck more swiftly than soldiers. Herod had secured his throne through Roman favor, had reshaped ancient Judea with astonishing architecture, had expanded the Herod temple into brilliance that dazzled pilgrims and impressed dignitaries. But the closer he drew to permanence, the more fragile he felt. Power gained through calculation must always be defended through vigilance, and vigilance, when untethered from trust, becomes paranoia. His marriage to Mariamne was meant to weave legitimacy into his reign. She descended from the Hasmonean line, a priestly and royal family deeply rooted in Judean memory. Through her, Herod hoped to anchor himself in the sacred narrative he could never fully inherit. In King Herod biography, this union appears strategic, almost poetic. The foreign-born ruler and the noble Judean princess joined to reconcile bloodline and empire. Yet love cannot thrive where suspicion governs. Mariamne's lineage, once an asset, became a threat in Herod's imagination. The very ancestry that strengthened his claim also reminded him of his outsider status. Court intrigue thickened like desert heat before a storm. Whispered accusations drifted through marble corridors. Advisors competed for influence, and in the stillness of night, Herod's mind rehearsed betrayals that had not yet occurred. The land that never slept now had a king who could not sleep. He ordered investigations, he questioned loyalty, he measured glances and interpreted silence as conspiracy. Eventually, fear demanded sacrifice. Mariamne was executed under charges of treason. The decision echoed through Jerusalem, not as triumph, but as tragedy. Even Rome, accustomed to ruthless governance, observed with unease. But suspicion, once fed, does not starve easily. In the years that followed, Herod's own sons would face accusation. Alexander and Aristobulus, heirs who carried Hasmonean blood, were tried and executed on charges of plotting revolt. Later, even Antipater, the son he once favored, would be condemned. The pattern became chilling. The king who built fortresses against external enemies dismantled his own household from within. In Roman client-king politics, cruelty could be rationalized as stability. Yet in the quiet cadence of biblical history for sleep, these events feel heavier than policy. They feel human. In palace halls lined with polished stone, fear hardened into something more enduring than marble. The glitter of mosaics could not soften the echo of absence at the family table. Herod's reign remained secure in the eyes of Rome. Taxes flowed, rebellions were suppressed, the Herod temple stood magnificent. But inside the king, a private war raged without truce. The architect of cities could not design peace within his own heart. His story, suspended between genius and brutality, reminds us that greatness measured in monuments does not guarantee tranquility of soul. And as the final years of his life approached, illness would claim his body, while isolation claimed his spirit. The crown remained, but the cost of wearing it had carved deeper wounds than any chisel could leave in stone. The problem with killing too many heirs is that in the end, you are left only with those who should never have been crowned. As Herod the Great's breath grew shallow and his once commanding voice trembled beneath the weight of illness, the future of the Herodian dynasty did not feel secure. It felt unstable, like desert wind shifting dunes in the night. The land that never slept now watched an aging king who had spent decades fortifying cities, yet had failed to fortify succession. In the final chapters of his reign, the palace became quieter but more tense as scribes moved softly through corridors carrying wax tablets and sealed drafts of wills. Herod had changed his testament before. He would change it again. In the story of the Herod sons, inheritance was not a linear path, but a battlefield fought with ink instead of swords. Each revision of the will revealed not only political calculation, but psychological unraveling. The king who had once commanded armies now wrestled with suspicion toward his own bloodline. He had executed sons he believed dangerous. He had silenced whispers with permanent solutions. And yet, with each execution, he narrowed his own future. The crown grew heavier, not because it was contested by enemies, but because it lacked worthy successors.
In the final winter of his life, Herod lay awake, imagining betrayals that no longer required proof. The palace windows opened toward Jerusalem's hills, but peace did not enter. Servants whispered about new decrees. Courtiers speculated about which name would remain in the will by morning. The rhythm of succession shifted as quickly as political weather. In the broader landscape of Roman client kings, this uncertainty was perilous. Rome valued stability above sentiment. A fractured inheritance could invite intervention. Augustus, now emperor, watched the eastern territories carefully. Judea was profitable, strategic, and volatile. A vacuum of authority would not be tolerated. And so Herod's pen moved again across parchment. First one son, then another, then a recalibration of territories. Archelaus would receive Judea. Antipas would govern Galilee and Perea. Philip would oversee the northern lands. The kingdom would not remain whole. It would be divided, partitioned like inheritance in a family too wounded to remain unified. In the quiet cadence of history for sleep, this moment feels almost tragic rather than dramatic. A father who had eliminated threats now struggled to define legacy. The Herodian dynasty had been built on calculation, but calculation cannot manufacture trust. As illness tightened its grip, Herod's revisions became less about governance and more about control beyond the grave. If he could not guarantee loyalty in life, perhaps he could script order in death. Yet even as he revised, doubt persisted. Which of the Herod sons possessed strength? Which possessed restraint? Which would survive Roman scrutiny? The will, once a legal document, became a mirror of anxiety. In trying to protect his throne, Herod had dismantled the very foundation of dynastic continuity. And so, as torches flickered against stone walls and the king drifted between fever and clarity, the future of Judea waited, not with confidence, but with apprehension.
When Herod the Great finally died, the air in Jerusalem did not clear, it shifted. Relief mingled with uncertainty, and the fragile machinery of succession began to move. Among the Herod sons, the name that rose first and most heavily was Herod Archelaus. According to the final version of his father's will, Archelaus would inherit Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, the very heart of the territory. Yet even before Rome confirmed the arrangement, tensions stirred in the streets. Archelaus did not inherit the architectural brilliance of his father, nor his calculated patience. What he inherited was a fractured throne and a population exhausted by suspicion. In the early days of his rule, unrest flared during Passover in Jerusalem. The crowds, still carrying grievances from Herod's long and often brutal reign, demanded justice, reform, and the removal of certain officials associated with corruption. Archelaus responded not with restraint, but with force. Soldiers entered the city. Blood was spilled near the temple courts. Thousands were said to have died. In the quiet cadence of history for sleep, this moment feels like a tremor beneath the stones of ancient Judea. A ruler's first significant act had not been reconciliation, but repression. Word traveled quickly across the region and beyond. Judea, already known to Rome as a sensitive frontier, now seemed unstable once again. Delegations of Jewish leaders and even Samaritans journeyed to Rome to petition Augustus directly. They described Archelaus as cruel, impulsive, unfit. In the delicate ecosystem of Roman client kings, public unrest combined with formal complaint could become fatal to a reign. Rome did not cherish dynasties for their sentimentality. It preserved order for its own advantage.
Augustus summoned Archelaus to answer the accusations. The emperor listened, weighed political risk, and ultimately chose stability over loyalty to a deceased ally's testament. Archelaus was removed from power and exiled to Gaul. In the long arc of the Herodian dynasty, this was a striking humiliation. A son who had inherited the core of the kingdom was now displaced from his own narrative, a ruler without territory, a king expelled from the story he believed was his birthright. Judea itself was transformed. Rather than entrusting the region again to a single heir, Rome reorganized it under direct administration, appointing prefects who answered to the emperor. The experiment of Archelaus had failed quickly. In biblical history for sleep, this transition feels almost symbolic. The land that once demanded divinely anointed kings was now governed by imperial officials whose authority derived from distant decree. Archelaus fades from prominence, remembered more for his abrupt fall than for any lasting achievement. Yet his brief and troubled rule reveals something essential about the legacy of Herod the Great. Fear had shaped succession, division had weakened continuity, and Rome, patient and pragmatic, would not hesitate to redraw borders when instability threatened revenue and order. The crown passed, but it did not remain whole. The story of the Herod sons was only beginning, and already one had been removed like a flawed stone from an unfinished wall. If Archelaus was the son who lost the center, then Herod Antipas was the son who learned to survive at the edges. When the kingdom fractured, it did not disappear. It thinned, it stretched. It became something smaller, but no less ambitious. Antipas received Galilee and Perea, territories that did not include Jerusalem, did not contain the temple, did not hold the sacred weight of Judea itself. Yet in the story of the Herodian dynasty, it is often the peripheral figures who step unexpectedly into the brightest historical light. Herod Antipas governed longer than Archelaus and with more subtlety. He understood, perhaps more clearly than his brother, that to endure as one of Rome's Roman client kings required careful performance. He rebuilt cities, most notably Tiberias, naming it in honor of Emperor Tiberius, a gesture of loyalty carved directly into geography. Like his father, he used architecture as language. But unlike Herod the Great, Antipas ruled without the full authority of kingship. His title was Tetrarch, a ruler of a fourth, a fragment of what had once been unified. The crown had been cut into pieces, and each son held only a shard. Yet ambition, like inheritance, does not shrink easily. In the quiet rhythm of history for sleep, Antipas appears almost pragmatic. He maintained relative stability in his territories. Trade moved, taxes were collected, Roman oversight remained satisfied. But beneath the surface, another narrative was forming, one that would intertwine his name with prophetic voices and moral controversy. The marriage that defined his reign was not to secure political lineage, but to satisfy personal desire. He divorced his first wife, a Nabatean princess, and married Herodias, who had been the wife of his half-brother. This union ignited outrage. Among the Herod sons, Antipas was perhaps the most visible in moral drama rather than military conquest. A prophet named John would openly condemn the marriage, calling it unlawful. Antipas, accustomed to authority, found himself confronted not by armies, but by words that carried spiritual weight in ancient Judea, words that echoed through crowds, words that unsettled power. And so, like his father before him, Antipas responded with imprisonment and ultimately execution. In biblical history for sleep, this moment reverberates softly yet persistently. The ruler who lacked a full crown still feared dissent. The dynasty that had been built on suspicion continued to defend itself against perceived threat. Meanwhile, in the northern territories, another brother governed quietly. Philip, often overshadowed, ruled lands east of the Jordan with relative calm. He rebuilt cities, administered without spectacle, and earned a reputation for moderation. In the larger arc of the Herodian dynasty, Philip represents a quieter thread, a reminder that not all heirs inherited paranoia with equal intensity. And yet, even in his steadiness, the fragmentation of the kingdom remained visible. The once unified domain of Herod the Great had become a map of divided authority. Archelaus exiled, Antipas ruling but entangled in scandal, Philip steady but peripheral. The division satisfied Rome's need for manageable governance. Smaller territories meant reduced risk of unified rebellion. For Rome, this was strategic success. For the dynasty, it was dilution. The crown had been broken, not destroyed, but broken nonetheless. And in the spaces between those broken pieces, ambition still breathed.
He could order the head of a prophet to be severed because of a dance, yet he stood silent before a bound man who was still called king. In the fractured legacy of the Herodian dynasty, Herod Antipas occupies a space that feels smaller than his father's shadow, yet darker in memory. If Herod the Great built monuments to secure greatness, Herod Antipas ruled a quieter stage, one defined not by massive temples, but by moments that would echo across centuries. As Galilee Tetrarch, he governed lands that seemed peaceful to the eye. The Sea of Galilee shimmered in the morning light, fishing boats drifted over calm water, villages rested among rolling hills, olive trees bent gently in the wind. On the surface, this was not the volatile heart of Judea. It was pastoral, almost tender. And yet, beneath that quiet beauty, currents of expectation and unrest flowed as surely as the lake's hidden tides. Antipas lived with a quiet comparison that never fully left him. He was not Herod the Great. He did not command the temple in Jerusalem. He did not rule the sacred center. He was a ruler of fragments, a tetrarch rather than a king. Rome recognized him, but did not crown him fully. His authority was real, yet limited, respectable, yet incomplete. In the psychology of Roman client kings, this half-status could be more unsettling than exile. He governed, yes. He built Tiberias along the shore, imprinting Roman loyalty onto Galilean soil. He hosted officials, collected taxes, maintained order, but the memory of his father's scale lingered. The monumental Herod temple was not his achievement. The grand fortresses were not his design. He presided over a smaller inheritance, and ambition, when compressed, often turns inward. In the villages of Galilee, voices rose that did not seek permission from tetrarchs. Preachers moved along dusty roads, crowds gathered by the water. Hope was spoken not in marble halls, but in open fields. In ancient Judea, prophecy had never vanished. It resurfaced whenever injustice and longing met. Antipas understood power. He understood Rome, but the language of prophets was different. It did not flatter rulers. It did not negotiate carefully. It accused, it warned, it called for repentance. And in this serene landscape of fishing nets and quiet hills, a confrontation began to form that would stain his name more permanently than any architectural achievement. Herod Antipas ruled Galilee as a political figure, but he was about to collide with something far older than Rome and far more dangerous than rebellion. The stage was small, the lake calm, the villages modest. Yet history does not measure impact by geography. It measures it by moral turning points. And in this tranquil tetrarchy, a drama was gathering that would bind the name of Herod Antipas forever to the fate of a prophet and the silence before a king. The banquet was meant to be ordinary in its excess. Music drifted across polished floors.
Oil lamps trembled against painted walls. Wine poured generously into cups already heavy with indulgence. In the palace of the Galilean tetrarch, celebration often blurred the line between politics and pleasure. Yet on this night, beneath laughter and layered perfumes, history tightened its breath. John the Baptist had already unsettled Herod Antipas long before the feast began. The prophet's voice moved like wind across the Jordan, drawing crowds who came not for spectacle, but for repentance. John the Baptist spoke openly against Antipas's marriage to Herodias, calling it unlawful. In ancient Judea, such public rebuke was not simply moral commentary, it was destabilizing. Words carried authority that Rome could not regulate. And so Antipas did what rulers often do when confronted by inconvenient truth. He imprisoned the voice. John was confined, not yet silenced, but contained. Even then, the narrative of Herod Antipas remained suspended between fear and fascination. The tetrarch reportedly listened to John at times, disturbed yet intrigued, unwilling to release him but hesitant to kill him. There was something in the prophet's certainty that unsettled him more deeply than rebellion ever could. Then came the feast, then came the dance. In the soft cadence of history for sleep, the scene unfolds slowly, almost tragically inevitable. Salome dance, later remembered in art and imagination, was at that moment simply a performance within a court accustomed to spectacle. The daughter of Herodias entered, her movements measured, her presence captivating the assembled guests. Applause followed, wine emboldened the ruler, and in a moment of theatrical generosity, Antipas made a vow. "Ask of me whatever you wish," he said, "and I will give it to you, even half my kingdom." Words spoken in celebration, without foresight, without caution. In the psychology of power, promises made before witnesses become chains. The young woman withdrew to consult her mother. The request returned not as gold, not as land, not as jewels. It returned as a head, the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Silence must have pressed against the air. Even a ruler accustomed to force would have felt the weight of this choice. To refuse would expose weakness. To comply would stain his name. Yet the vow had been made publicly. Pride and fear conspired. And so, beneath music and murmurs, the execution was ordered. A prophet's voice was severed because a ruler feared embarrassment more than injustice. The image lingers across centuries. A head presented on a silver dish, exchanged for a careless promise spoken between wine and applause. In biblical history for sleep, this is not merely a dramatic episode, it is a mirror. Herod Antipas, son of a father ruled by suspicion, chose reputation over righteousness. The dynasty's legacy of insecurity had reached another generation. And though John the Baptist would no longer speak, his silence would echo more loudly than his rebukes. Years passed, and the echo of that banquet did not fade. The name Herod Antipas became inseparable from John the Baptist, from a promise spoken too quickly, from a platter carried through torchlight. Yet history was not finished with the Galilee tetrarch. Another moment would come, quieter yet heavier, when power and prophecy would stand in the same room again. This time there would be no dance, no applause, no wine. There would be chains. During the Passover season, when Jerusalem swelled with pilgrims and tension pressed against its walls, a prisoner was sent to Antipas. Rumors had already traveled north and south about this man from Galilee. He healed the sick, they said. He spoke in parables. He gathered fishermen and tax collectors alike. Some whispered that he might be the one long awaited. Others dismissed him as another wandering teacher. But his name carried weight. And now, during what later generations would call the Jesus trial, That name entered the palace of Herod Antipas. The Tetrarch was curious. The Gospel accounts suggest he hoped to see a miracle, a display, perhaps even a spectacle. Power often seeks entertainment when it feels secure. Antipas had executed a prophet once. He now stood before a man whom some called king. The irony was quiet but profound. A tetrarch without a full crown confronting a prisoner accused of claiming kingship. In the chamber, expectations hung in the air. Questions were asked, demands were implied. Yet the response that met Herod Antipas was not defiance, not rhetoric, not spectacle. It was silence. In the slow, meditative rhythm of history for sleep, that silence feels vast. A ruler accustomed to negotiation and reaction faced a man who would not perform. The one who had desired a sign received none. The one who held temporary authority encountered a figure whose influence would outlast empires. In biblical history for sleep, this encounter does not explode with drama. It resonates with restraint. Antipas mocked him, perhaps out of frustration, perhaps to mask uncertainty. A robe was placed upon the prisoner in ironic gesture. Then he was sent back to Pilate. No execution order came from Herod this time. No sword descended at his command. Yet absence of action is not absence of responsibility. He stood in the room. He saw the man. He chose not to intervene. The dynasty that had learned to secure power through decisive violence now encountered a moment where silence itself became a verdict. In the broader arc of the Herodian dynasty, this encounter marks a subtle turning point. Archelaus had been exiled. Antipas would later face his own downfall after conflict with the Nabateans and political rivalry that reached Rome. The tetrarch who once feared prophets would eventually lose his own position and be banished, like his brother before him. The crown, already fractured, continued to erode. But this scene endures differently. Herod Antipas did not order this execution, yet history remembers him standing near it. He could command a beheading to protect pride, yet when confronted with a bound figure called king, he responded with curiosity and then withdrawal. And so we close this chapter with a quiet reflection. A ruler who silenced a prophet found himself silenced by a prisoner's refusal to perform. He did not raise his hand in condemnation that day, yet he did not raise it in defense either. This time, he did not issue the final order, but history still carves his name among those who looked away.
He borrowed recklessly, gambled carelessly, tasted prison walls, and then awoke one morning with a crown upon his head, while death waited patiently inside a shimmering robe. In the long, restless arc of the Herodian dynasty, few figures rise and fall with such theatrical swiftness as Herod Agrippa I. If Herod the Great built with stone and Herod Antipas trembled before prophets, Herod Agrippa seemed to drift like a ship tossed between fortune and ruin, carried not by architecture or moral drama, but by Roman politics. He was born into complexity, a grandson of Herod the Great, inheriting a name heavy with suspicion and ambition. Yet, unlike his grandfather, Agrippa did not begin with stability. His youth unfolded in Rome, among imperial circles, where extravagance and favor determined survival. He befriended princes, dined with heirs, learned the delicate choreography of imperial intimacy. But friendship at court was expensive. Debt followed him like a shadow. In kingly households across ancient Judea, lineage was capital. In Rome, proximity to power was currency. Agrippa spent freely, wagering on relationships, borrowing to sustain appearances. There were nights when fortune smiled, and nights when creditors pressed harder than enemies. The life of Herod Agrippa was not a straight ascent,
but a pattern of plunges and recoveries. He angered Tiberius. He was imprisoned after a careless remark regarding succession. Iron bars replaced banquet halls. For a moment, the descendant of biblical kings appeared reduced to a cautionary tale. Yet history within the sphere of Roman politics turns quickly. Tiberius died. Caligula rose. Old friendships resurfaced. Agrippa was released, rewarded, granted territories that once belonged to Philip in Lysanias. The debtor became a ruler. The prisoner became a client king, Herod, once more entrusted with authority. The rhythm feels almost unbelievable, yet it reveals the fragile architecture of power. Agrippa's fortunes were tethered not to military conquest, not to public virtue, but to imperial favor. When Caligula's erratic reign ended in assassination, uncertainty swept Rome again. Agrippa did not retreat. He maneuvered carefully, aligning himself with Claudius, advocating for him in the chaotic aftermath. His loyalty was rewarded yet again. Territories expanded. The kingdom of his grandfather was nearly restored under his hand. In the cadence of history for sleep, Agrippa's life sways gently between risk and reward. He was neither the paranoid architect nor the morally entangled tetrarch. He was a political gambler who understood that survival required reading the currents of empire. Yet such currents are never calm for long. His crown was real, his authority visible, but it was born from imperial tides rather than ancestral inevitability. And in the subtle mathematics of biblical kings, a throne secured by shifting alliances always carries within it the memory of instability. Herod Agrippa had risen higher than many expected. The dynasty, once fractured, seemed briefly reunited. But when a crown rests on fortune rather than foundation, the shimmer of gold often conceals the quiet approach of collapse.
When Herod Agrippa returned to Judea, crowned not merely by title but by imperial favor, he understood something his predecessors had learned painfully. Power in ancient Judea could not survive on Roman endorsement alone. A ruler might be recognized in the Senate, praised in imperial corridors, even embraced within the shifting tides of Roman politics. But if he failed to resonate with the temple and the law, his throne would tremble. And so Herod Agrippa did something subtle and strategic. He chose to appear more Jewish than many of his own subjects. Unlike the colder distance of some Roman client kings, Agrippa moved visibly within Jerusalem's sacred rhythms. He observed festivals, he honored the temple, he read from the law publicly during the Feast of Tabernacles, standing not as a distant governor, but as a king who wished to be seen as one of the people. The gesture was powerful. The people wept, tradition says, moved by the sight of a ruler who seemed to embrace covenant rather than merely tolerate it. In the evolving narrative of biblical kings, Agrippa positioned himself carefully between Caesar and covenant. He knew the fragility of his crown. He had lived long enough in Rome to understand how quickly favor could evaporate. Therefore, he anchored himself in the visible practices of Judaism, not only out of reverence, but out of calculation. The Herodian dynasty had long struggled with legitimacy. Agrippa sought to mend that fracture through performance of devotion. Yet the tension never fully vanished, for he remained undeniably a client king, Herod shaped by imperial appointment. His territories were restored not through ancestral inevitability, but through political maneuver. He could not afford open defiance of Rome, nor could he afford alienation of the temple elite. In History for Sleep, this balancing act feels almost like walking along a narrow ridge between two cliffs. One misstep could lead to exile or revolt, and so Agrippa maintained equilibrium with care. He cultivated loyalty in Jerusalem while sustaining connections to imperial power. He reinforced city walls, strengthening Jerusalem's defenses,
an act that stirred both pride among locals and suspicion among Roman observers. Claudius, though friendly, did not ignore signs of growing autonomy. Agrippa's reign, though brief, shimmered with possibility. The kingdom resembled once again the domain of Herod the Great, unified under a single hand. For a fleeting moment, the Herodian dynasty seemed restored to coherence. But unity built on dual obligation is rarely stable. Agrippa's identity remained divided. He was embraced in the temple courts and welcomed in imperial halls. He was praised by priests and trusted by emperors. Yet beneath the harmony, tension coiled quietly. To please biblical kingship expectations required humility before God. To sustain Roman politics required deference to Caesar. Agrippa navigated both, but navigation is not permanence. And as applause grew louder in Judea, as recognition deepened among his people, something within the fragile architecture of his reign began to strain. The very balance he maintained would soon tilt under the weight of adoration and pride.
The final scene of Herod Agrippa I does not unfold in battle, nor in conspiracy, nor in quiet exile. It unfolds in applause. In the account preserved in Herod Agrippa Acts, the king appears in Caesarea during a public gathering, addressing an audience eager to hear him. He wears a robe woven with threads of silver, a garment designed not merely to clothe, but to astonish. As the sun rises and strikes the fabric, light flashes outward in blinding brilliance. The crowd gasps. The moment feels almost theatrical, as if Roman politics and sacred theater have merged into one luminous spectacle. Agrippa stands elevated, radiant, commanding attention not through architecture this time, but through presence. And then the voices rise. The voice of a god and not of a man, they cry. It is a familiar temptation for rulers in every age. Adoration can feel like confirmation. Praise can blur into deification. In the tradition of biblical kings, humility before God defined legitimacy. But here, in the echoing cheers, something shifts. Agrippa does not correct them. He does not redirect the glory. He receives it. In the meditative rhythm of history for sleep, this acceptance feels quieter than arrogance, yet heavier than error. It is a pause in which eternity seems to lean closer. According to the narrative in Acts, judgment follows swiftly. A sudden pain, a collapse, an illness described in stark and unsettling detail. The same king who had balanced Rome and temple, who had walked the narrow ridge between Caesar and covenant, now lay stricken. The account speaks of being eaten from within, a visceral image that transcends medical explanation and enters symbolic terrain. In ancient Judea, where story and theology often intertwined, such a death was not interpreted merely as natural. It was whispered about in corridors and courtyards. In the silence of night, people murmured that a king had been consumed before his body ever touched the ground. The robe that shimmered in sunlight could not shield him. The crown restored through Roman politics could not preserve him. In the wider sweep of the Herodian dynasty, Agrippa's end feels almost like a closing bracket. The grandson who nearly reunited the fractured kingdom fell at the height of admiration. His reign, brief but intense, leaves behind both political achievement and theological warning. For client King Herod, the ultimate vulnerability was not rebellion or debt or prison. It was the fragile boundary between power and pride. Agrippa's death reverberated beyond Caesarea. His son, Agrippa II, would inherit a different world, one increasingly shaped by Roman governors and rising unrest. The dynasty would continue, but never again with the illusion of restored grandeur. And so we let the scene dim slowly. The silver robe lies folded.
The applause fades into memory. A life that rose from debtor to monarch ends not in dramatic overthrow, but in sudden frailty. In the story of biblical kings, greatness is never measured only by territory regained or walls fortified. It is measured by the posture of the heart before glory. Herod Agrippa I stood in brilliance and accepted praise meant for more than man. And in that acceptance, the fragile architecture of his fortune gave way.
He was born to be king, yet when his turn came, the kingdom was already gone. In the long twilight of the Herodian dynasty, Herod Agrippa II stands not as a builder, not as a gambler crowned by fortune, but as a ruler shaped by absence. He carried a name heavy with legacy, grandson of Herod Agrippa I, heir to a lineage that once held Jerusalem beneath its seal. Yet the world into which he stepped was not the world of his grandfather. Rome had tightened its grip. Provincial governors had replaced client King Herod as the dominant instrument of control. The illusion of restored sovereignty had already begun to dissolve. Herod Agrippa II inherited territories in the north, lands scattered and politically useful, but he did not inherit Jerusalem itself. The sacred heart of ancient Judea was no longer entrusted to a Herodian throne. Instead, he was granted authority to oversee the temple treasury and appoint high priests, roles that positioned him as an interpreter of Jewish law without granting him full kingship. In the quiet cadence of history for sleep, his life unfolds like a study in contrast. He was educated, articulate, deeply familiar with the traditions of his people. Roman historians describe him as knowledgeable in Jewish customs, capable of debating theological matters with clarity. Yet that very closeness to law did not translate into trust. Many among the Jewish population regarded him with suspicion. He was too Roman for some, too Herodian for others. His authority felt administrative rather than ancestral. He resembled a religious advisor paid by Rome, a mediator whose loyalty seemed divided. In Roman politics, such figures were useful. They bridged gaps between empire and province. They translated tension into manageable discourse. But usefulness does not equal belonging. Agrippa II stood in synagogues and in Roman courts with equal fluency, yet neither world embraced him fully. The phrase "last Herodian king" would later follow his name, but even that title feels incomplete. He ruled, yes, but not over a unified kingdom. He advised but did not command absolute loyalty. He carried the weight of dynasty without the solidity of domain. In the broader sweep of Jewish-Roman war tensions, his position grew increasingly precarious. Jerusalem simmered with dissatisfaction. Roman governors, some corrupt and insensitive, inflamed resentment. Taxes pressed heavily. Religious sensitivities were mishandled, and Agrippa II, positioned awkwardly between Caesar and Covenant, attempted moderation. He urged calm. He counseled against rebellion. He warned that Rome's legions would not hesitate if provoked. His speeches, preserved in fragments by later historians, reveal a man aware of looming catastrophe. Yet words cannot quiet a storm once it has gathered momentum. In the slow rhythm of history for sleep, his early reign feels almost melancholic. A king educated to govern a sacred people found himself presiding over erosion rather than expansion. He possessed knowledge, lineage, and access, but not sovereignty. The throne he was born to inherit had already been thinned by time and empire. The years that followed did not erupt at months into flame. They accumulated like dry brush beneath a relentless sun. In the uneasy stillness before the Jewish-Roman War, Grievances layered quietly across Judea. Roman procurators mismanaged sacred funds. Soldiers displayed imperial standards near holy spaces. Small insults gathered into heavy resentment. Herod Agrippa II watched this mounting tension with the anxious awareness of a man who understood both sides too well. He had grown up within Roman politics. He knew the machinery of empire, the discipline of legions, the unyielding logic that governed provincial rebellion. At the same time, he was versed in the law and history of his own people. He understood the weight of covenant, the fierce attachment to temple and Torah. In History for Sleep Bible, this dual knowledge feels almost tragic. To see clearly can be more painful than to act blindly. When unrest began to escalate in the late 60s AD, Agrippa II attempted mediation. Standing before crowds in Jerusalem, he urged restraint. He warned that revolt would not bring liberation, but devastation. His speeches, later recorded by historians, reveal a tone not of tyranny, but of pleading. He did not threaten his audience with cruelty. He described Roman power calmly, almost sorrowfully, as an inevitability. Yet his words fell upon ears already hardened by humiliation and anger. The Jewish-Roman War did not begin because of a single speech ignored. It ignited because trust had eroded beyond repair. Roman governance had become synonymous with exploitation. Religious provocations struck deeply. National identity sharpened under pressure. Agrippa II, though bearing the title of last Herodian king, could not command loyalty strong enough to reverse momentum. His authority was advisory, not absolute, and when violence erupted, he chose alignment with Rome. Some would later interpret this as betrayal. Others would call it realism. In truth, perhaps it was survival. He joined the Roman campaign under the command of Vespasian and later Titus. He witnessed the mobilization of legions, the slow, tightening siege around Jerusalem. In the gentle cadence of History for Sleep, we do not dwell on the horror. Instead, we trace the inevitability. Supply lines cut, factions within the city turning against each other, hunger spreading like shadow. The fall of Jerusalem, 70 AD, did not arrive as sudden thunder. It arrived as a long exhale of collapse. The temple, center of Jewish life, was consumed in flame. The structure that had defined generations fell under Roman assault. For the Herodian dynasty, this moment marked more than military defeat. It signaled the erasure of relevance. A king without Jerusalem was a monarch in name only. Agrippa II had warned against rebellion, yet he now stood within the machinery that dismantled the city he once oversaw. History records him as present in the Roman camp, a royal observer to imperial conquest. His position, once precarious, had become almost spectral. He was neither fully conqueror nor defender. He was a witness to ending. In the soft unfolding of History for Sleep Bible, the war feels less like spectacle and more like inevitability shaped by accumulated missteps. Agrippa II's life during these years becomes defined not by decisive action, but by proximity to ruin. From the Roman encampment, Herod Agrippa II watched the city that had once defined his dynasty burn against the night. The flames of Jerusalem did not distinguish between rebel and royal memory. They rose in equal indifference, consuming wood, stone, and centuries of prayer. In that moment, the last Herodian king stood not at the center of command, but at the edge of history.
The fall of Jerusalem, 70 AD, marked more than the destruction of a city. It signaled the unraveling of a political experiment that had stretched back to Herod the Great. The idea that a client king, Herod, could stand between empire and covenant had finally collapsed under the weight of war. Agrippa II survived the Jewish-Roman War, but survival is not triumph. He continued to live under Roman patronage, retaining titles and estates in territories far from the smoldering heart of Judea. Yet those lands felt peripheral, almost symbolic. The temple was gone. Jerusalem lay subdued. The sacred center that gave meaning to Jewish kingship no longer stood. In the meditative cadence of History for Sleep, his later years unfold quietly, almost softly, as though history itself had lowered its voice. Agrippa II traveled within imperial circles, advising, observing, perhaps remembering. He had warned against revolt. He had chosen Rome when conflict became unavoidable. Some would judge him harshly. Others would see in him the realism of a ruler aware of imperial inevitability. But judgment fades in the long arc of time. What remains is the image of a king born into legacy, yet destined for vacancy. He had inherited the name, the education, the lineage of the Herodian dynasty. He had learned the law, navigated Roman politics, witnessed the Jewish-Roman war from both sides, and yet he never truly ruled a unified kingdom. He was, in the end, a monarch without a throne that mattered. When he died, likely in the final years of the 1st century, there was no grand transfer of power within Judea, no restoration of Herodian authority. Rome governed directly. The era of biblical kings connected to the house of Herod had ended, not with a coronation, but with quiet absorption into empire. In History for Sleep, this conclusion feels less like tragedy and more like fading light. The story that began with ambitious architecture and fragile crowns closes with absence. Agrippa II did not fall in dramatic betrayal. He did not perish in spectacular battle. He simply outlived the relevance of his crown. The fire that consumed Jerusalem also consumed the last illusion of Herodian sovereignty. And so we leave him there, standing beyond the smoke, aware perhaps that history had shifted beyond his grasp. That was his home, yet not his army. That was his city, yet not his command. It had been his inheritance in name, but never fully his kingdom. They built temples and fortresses, yet every stone whispered that their power stood upon sand. As the smoke of Jerusalem faded and the dynasty thinned into memory, what remained most visible of the house of Herod was not a throne, nor a crown, nor even a royal decree. It was stone. Massive, patient, immovable stone. In the long echo of History for Sleep, Herod architecture feels less like triumph and more like confession, carved into limestone. Herod the Great, the most ambitious of the line, understood something deeply Roman. Permanence is persuasion. If you cannot secure love, you secure awe. If you cannot command loyalty of the heart, you command the eye. And so he built. He rebuilt the Second Temple, Herod, in a scale so grand that even critics admitted its splendor. He raised fortresses along desert ridges. He carved palaces into hillsides. He constructed Caesarea Maritima, a harbor city that seemed to defy the sea itself. To walk through these spaces in imagination is to feel the weight of ancient architecture designed not merely for function, but for reassurance. The temple platform in Jerusalem was expanded with engineering precision, stones so large that even modern observers pause in disbelief. Each block set with deliberate care, each corner aligned with celestial awareness and political calculation. The project was presented as devotion, it was framed as renewal, it was described as honor to God, and perhaps it was, in part. Yet beneath the sacred narrative lingered something else, the need to stabilize a fragile legitimacy. Herod ruled as a client king, Herod under Roman authority. His ancestry was Idumean, not fully embraced by Judean elites. Suspicion shadowed him from the beginning, and so the Second Temple Herod became both offering and argument. "See," it seemed to say, "I belong here. See what I have given you." The grandeur of ancient architecture can soothe doubt for a time. Marble floors and colonnaded courts can distract from whispered lineage. Caesarea Maritima, with its amphitheater and harbor engineered from hydraulic concrete, announced loyalty to Rome. It faced outward toward empire. It honored Caesar in name and form. Meanwhile, the temple faced inward toward covenant. Two directions, two audiences, one anxious king. In History for Sleep, this dual orientation feels almost tender in its vulnerability. Herod was not merely building cities, he was constructing a bridge between Rome and heaven, hoping stone could reconcile what blood could not. The result was breathtaking. Pilgrims climbed temple steps beneath gleaming facades. Sailors entered Caesarea's harbor astonished by its scale. Messengers carried stories of Masada history, of desert palaces perched impossibly high. Yet even as admiration spread, insecurity lingered. Beauty cannot erase suspicion entirely. Magnitude cannot silence prophecy. Herod's projects were magnificent, but they did not transform his origin. They did not remove the knowledge that Rome, not covenant, ultimately confirmed his crown. And so the architecture stands today as both marvel and metaphor. It represents aspiration, it embodies brilliance, but it also reveals anxiety. Each stone is a statement, each wall is a plea for permanence in a world where dynasties fade.
High above the desert, where wind moves without witness and silence settles like a second sky, Masada rises from stone as though it had always belonged there. In the slow cadence of History for Sleep, Masada history does not begin with fire, but with elevation. Herod the Great chose this plateau not only for defense, but for distance. Distance from Jerusalem's scrutiny, distance from Roman suspicion, distance from the unpredictable currents of court intrigue. Here, carved into the rock and terraced with care, he constructed a refuge suspended between earth and horizon. The fortress was practical, yes, its storehouses filled with grain, its cisterns engineered to collect rare desert rain, its walls layered for resilience. Yet beneath the practicality lingered something more intimate. Masada was insurance against collapse. It was the architecture of fear translated into geometry. Within Herod architecture, Masada occupies a different emotional register than the Second Temple Herod or Caesarea Maritima. The temple was public devotion. Caesarea was imperial loyalty. Masada was private contingency. It stood ready for the moment when alliances fractured and crowns trembled. In ancient architecture, fortresses speak a quiet truth. Those who build them imagine flight as much as defense. When the Jewish-Roman War later swept across Judea and the fall of Jerusalem 70 AD became irreversible, Masada would acquire a second life in memory. Long after Herod's death, rebels would retreat there, clinging to the last elevation of autonomy. In History for Sleep, Bible,
We do not dwell on the sharp edges of their final hours. We simply acknowledge the wind that must have moved across the plateau, the night air that carried both resolve and exhaustion. Masada became a symbol not of Herodian security, but of collective defiance. A place originally conceived as royal refuge, transformed into national legend. And this transformation reveals something tender about stone. Architecture does not remain loyal to its architect. It outlives intention. It absorbs new meanings. Herod may have imagined Masada as personal sanctuary, a guarantee against the fragility of his crown. Yet history repurposed it. The fortress no longer belonged to the dynasty that commissioned it. It belonged to memory. The plateau watched as generations interpreted its walls differently. For some, it became testament to resistance. For others, a reminder of tragedy. For all, it stood as evidence that power always anticipates vulnerability. In the hush of history for sleep, Masada feels less like a battleground and more like a suspended breath, a place where ambition and fear met the desert sky. The stones do not speak loudly, they do not accuse, they simply endure. And in enduring, they reveal that every empire, every dynasty builds with the quiet knowledge that retreat may one day become necessary.
When the dust settles and centuries pass, it is not the voices of kings that endure most clearly, but the geometry of what they leave behind. In the fading light of the Herodian dynasty, Herodian architecture becomes the final language through which the house of Herod still speaks. The Second Temple Herod no longer stands in its fullness, yet its retaining walls remain, massive and patient, absorbing the touch of generations who come to remember rather than to obey. Caesarea Maritima rests by the Mediterranean, its harbor now quiet, its amphitheater open to wind instead of imperial spectacle. Masada keeps its vigil above the desert, neither Roman nor rebel now, but simply stone against sky. In the slow unfolding of history for Sleep Bible, these places feel less like ruins and more like witnesses. They witnessed Roman ambition. They witnessed Jewish longing. They witnessed the Jewish-Roman War and the fall of Jerusalem, 70 A.D., and they witnessed the slow disappearance of the last Herodian king into the background of empire. Architecture is honest in a way that politics is not. It does not pretend permanence beyond erosion. Even the most ambitious ancient architecture eventually yields to weather. Yet while crowns corrode and decrees are forgotten, walls remain long enough to be touched by descendants. The house of Herod attempted to anchor itself in stone, to translate insecurity into symmetry, to turn fragile authority into visible magnitude. They built high to counter doubt. They built grand to quiet whispers. They built sacred to approach heaven and imperial to appease Rome. And in doing so, they became architects not only of cities, but of memory. What is striking in the hush of history for sleep is how detached the stones now feel from the anxiety that shaped them. Pilgrims approach the Western Wall not to honor Herod, but to pray. Tourists walk through Caesarea Maritima marveling at engineering rather than at royal insecurity. Visitors climb Masada at dawn, watching the sun rise over silence, rarely dwelling on the private fears of the king who first fortified it. The architecture has outlived its original purpose. It has shed the urgency of legitimacy and absorbed new meaning. And perhaps that is the gentlest lesson of this chapter. The house of Herod believed that grandeur could stabilize destiny. They believed that if the temple shone brighter, if fortresses stood higher,
If harbors stretched farther into the sea, then history would hold them firmly. Yet history does not anchor itself in stone alone. It moves through faith, through memory, through collective story. The kings have long since fallen asleep. Their intrigues have dissolved into parchment and dust, but the blocks they set still catch the morning light. They remind us that power may be constructed, but permanence is granted elsewhere. In the end, the house of Herod became known not for the crowns they secured, but for the cities they razed and the silence that followed them. The stones remain, the architects sleep, and the desert wind continues its quiet passage across walls built in hope and in fear. They were called King of the Jews, yet their throne always stood suspended between Rome and God, never fully belonging to either. As the long arc of the house of Herod explained draws towards its quiet horizon, the Herodian dynasty end does not arrive with a trumpet blast. It arrives like dusk across ancient Judean history, soft, gradual, inevitable. Herod the Great began with ambition vast enough to reshape skylines. He secured favor from Rome, rebuilt the Second Temple Herod in dazzling splendor, raised Masada history into legend, and carved Caesarea Maritima into the coastline as proof that even the sea could be negotiated. He sought permanence through ancient architecture, hoping stone would stabilize bloodlines. Yet beneath each achievement lived fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of prophecy, fear that legitimacy granted by empire could be withdrawn at any moment. His sons inherited not only territory, but anxiety. Herod Archelaus struggled beneath resentment and was exiled, a ruler displaced from his own narrative. Herod Antipas presided over Galilee, caught in the quiet tremor between spectacle and silence, remembered in Bible history for sleep, for the execution of John the Baptist, and for standing before Jesus with curiosity rather than conviction. Herod Agrippa I rose like a gambler favored by fortune, navigating Roman politics with daring until applause turned fatal beneath a silver robe. Herod Agrippa II, the last Herodian king, watched Jerusalem burn from the Roman camp, a monarch without sovereignty, an heir to absence. When we gather them together in reflection, a pattern emerges: ambition followed by insecurity, construction followed by suspicion, authority borrowed, never fully owned. They were kings without a throne that rested firmly under them. Their crowns were recognized by Caesar, but questioned by covenant. Their legitimacy required constant reinforcement. In History for Sleep, this pattern feels less like accusation and more like human frailty magnified by scale. Power that is granted can also be rescinded. Titles bestowed by empire do not root deeply in sacred soil. The Herodian dynasty end was not a sudden collapse, but a thinning of relevance. Rome shifted from client kings to direct governance. The temple fell. Jerusalem changed hands, and the house of Herod faded into commentary rather than command. Yet to describe them only as failures would miss the tenderness of their struggle. They attempted to inhabit two worlds at once. They sought to reconcile Rome's steel with Israel's promise. They stood at the crossroads of empire and expectation, and in that liminal space, they built, ruled, feared, and ultimately yielded. Kings without a throne are not always weak. Sometimes they are suspended between loyalties too vast to reconcile. The story of the House of Herod is not simply about cruelty or construction. It is about the fragile architecture of borrowed authority, about how identity fractures when it is divided between external validation and internal covenant. As night settles gently over this final chapter of Bible history for sleep, the dynasty does not end with drama. It ends with diffusion, with names growing quieter in the corridors of time.
And now, as the desert cools and the wind moves gently across broken columns, we let the story settle into stillness. The House of Herod Explained is no longer a chronicle of rulers striving upward. It becomes a meditation on what remains when ambition has exhausted itself. In the hush of Bible history for sleep, we return once more to the landscape itself. Judea after empire, Judea after fire, Judea after crowns that never truly rested securely. The fortresses still cast long shadows at dusk. The foundations of the Second Temple Herod still hold memory in their stones. Caesarea Maritima rests beside the sea, no longer proclaiming loyalty to Caesar, simply listening to waves. Masada stands elevated, neither refuge nor rebellion now, but silhouette against dawn. The kings have faded, yet the terrain endures. This is the quiet irony of the Herodian dynasty end. They sought permanence through ancient architecture, through alliances with Rome, through titles carved into coin and decree. Yet permanence did not attach itself to their names as firmly as they hoped. It attached itself to the earth, to stone, to collective memory. Kings without a throne leave behind something more subtle than sovereignty. They leave behind questions. What is power when it is borrowed? What is identity when it depends on approval from distant authority? What happens when the title King of the Jews is spoken more loudly by empire than by covenant? These questions drift beyond ancient Judea history into our own era. We too build careers, reputations, identities that sometimes rest upon foundations granted by systems larger than ourselves. We too fear the day when approval shifts and structures tremble. In that sense, the House of Herod is not distant, it is human. Their anxieties, magnified by marble and military, echoes quietly in modern hearts. In History for Sleep, this realization arrives gently, not as condemnation, but as compassion. The Herodian rulers were neither purely villain nor purely visionary. They were men navigating a world of immense pressure. They sought to reconcile empire and faith, security and legacy, survival and significance. They succeeded at times, they failed at others. And in the end, their story dissolves not into shame, but into rest. Judea lies quiet beneath starlight. The wind moves across ruins without hostility. The Temple Mount holds both absence and remembrance. The desert keeps its patient vigil. And we whisper softly, as if placing a final stone upon a long pathway. The story of the House of Herod has closed, but the stones they set remain, like pillows upon which history rests its head. Sleep now comes easily to the past. The kings without a throne have laid down their borrowed crowns. The night gathers gently around ancient Judea history, and even the echoes of empire grow still.